cloud. Okay, hello and welcome everyone. This is the re-recording of the Ethereum Engineering Group meetup talk on Truffle. And so I'll hand it over to Sally. Sally, please introduce yourself.
So I'm Sally McFarlane. I work at Pegasus, and I recently went to TruffleCon, which is a conference all about truffle. And yeah, I'm just going to give you a bit of an intro into Truffle and TruffleCon and some highlights from the talks that I went to.
Sounds fantastic. Oh, well, take it away.
All right, I'll just share my screen. Can you see my slides? Oh, a minute.
Loading, thinking. And I can see your screen.
Okay, so, yep, Pegasus. So, yeah, as I said, a bit of an intro into Truffle and TruffleCon highlights. And just quickly, Pantheon, the product that we're building at Pegasus, it's an Ethereum client. It's written in Java. We're launching it officially and open sourcing it at DevCon in, it was 2 weeks. I think it's just over a week now. And you can use it with Truffle. So that's why I went to TruffleCon. So Truffle, if you don't already know what it is, there's 3 sort of products that all work together. So Truffle is the main one, and it manages sort of your project lifecycle. So you can use it to compile, deploy and test your Solidity smart contracts. Ganache is basically a test blockchain. So it's not a real blockchain, but it behaves like a blockchain with the added bonus that it's really nice and fast. So it's really good for using while you're developing your smart contracts. And then Drizzle sort of provides the front end piece. So the UI that interfaces into your smart contracts at the back end. So Truffle, and thanks, by the way, to Ben Burns from Truffle for these slides. So he presented this as part of his a presentation at TruffleCon and gave me permission to use some of his slides. So that's why they look so nice. So Truffle is based on a Mocha JavaScript testing framework, and you can interact with it on the command line, and Ganache also provides a bit of a UI as well. And they also have the concept of truffle boxes. So you can basically sort of package and publish like a group of smart contracts to the Truffle box website. And then anyone can just say on the command line, unbox, Truffle unbox, whatever, the pet shop or whatever other example, and just kind of get started with those examples. Ganache, yeah, so there's the command line interface, and there's also the UI, so you can kind of choose between them. And yeah, it's really good for development because it's nice and fast, and you can run your truffle tests against it. And Drizzle, I haven't actually used Drizzle, so I can't tell you too much about it, but yeah, it's to do with providing the UI front end for your smart contracts. You can use Truffle with Ganache, which is all running locally. You can also use Truffle to deploy your contracts to a test network like Ropsten or Rinkeby or Mainnet. And there's some links there to docs. That the Truffle community is really active on GitHub. So if you have questions, there's plenty of people there to help you out and get you started. Just some stats from the conference. So they've had 940,000 downloads of Truffle, 800,000 downloads of Ganache, and there are 26,000 projects, Truffle-related projects on GitHub. Yeah, so 2018 TruffleCon was in Portland, Oregon, and they were pretty excited to announce that next year, 2019, it's going to be hosted by Microsoft at their Redmond campus. Portland's quite nice. It's got lots bridges, just like Brisbane does. I think there's 8 bridges across the river in the city centre. Yeah, a bit of a shot there from the TruffleCon main stage, and yeah, rain poured. So some highlights from TruffleCon. So these are obviously just from the talks that I attended, and these notes are notes that I took. So take it all with a grain of salt. I might have missed something or misremembered something. And lots of presenters made their presentations or their slides public. So if you search for the hashtag TruffleCon on Twitter, you'll find plenty of presentations there if you want more details. So Truffle 5, which is in beta at the moment, there's the link to the GitHub. So you can also, if you uninstall Truffle, so npm uninstall Truffle, then you can npm install Truffle beta. The instructions are all there. So you can kind of try out Truffle 5 and switch back to Truffle 4 pretty easily. So some of the new features in Truffle 5, bring your own compiler, so you can actually specify the specific compiler that you want to use. So a version of the Solidity compiler or a different compiler entirely. They now support overloaded Solidity methods, being able to do a truffle init into a non-empty directory, which seems kind of like a small thing, but it does make life a bit easier. Revert error messages. So at the moment in Truffle 4, any revert will come back with the error message just saying undefined. So in Truffle 5, you will actually see the error strings that the revert is based on. So in your smart contract, if you're reverting for a specific reason, you'll actually see that reason in your tests. So you can kind of say, well, I want this method to revert with this specific message and kind of test for that. Better debugger breakpoints. They're getting rid of the candy, maple, cake, sugar, stock, stand, and mnemonic. So different users get different mnemonics. And they've added a flag so that you can see details of events. So at the moment in Truffle 4, you have to make your test fail to see any events created. So that's kind of nice. However, there are breaking changes. So they've changed to Web 3.1.0. So there's some changes involved in there in the way that you get accounts, different things, the way that you deploy contracts. But there's plenty of details on that GitHub page for guiding you through those. The big number library is also different. So if you're testing specific things with big numbers, that's all different. So Microsoft was one of the sponsors of TruffleCon. So they were there to announce some next-gen Truffle integration. So there's 8 Truffle boxes right now for Azure blockchain stuff. And they showed a preview of VS Code integration. So from within VS Code, you can run Ganache commands. So start and stop and run your tests and stuff from inside your IDE. So yeah, this guy, David Barella, who's a Microsoft tech evangelist based in Australia, ran through a whole example getting a Truffle project to run on Windows. So there are some specific things to get that working. So Truffle doesn't work directly on Windows. You have to run it on the Windows subsystem for Linux. And he showed some tools there as well. So Chocodar CLI was basically, you use it to watch the file system, so you can get it when you run your tests again, it will show you the output in a sort of a continuous way as your pipelines. And then the Mocha JUnit reporter was, it basically, yeah, so Truffle is built on top of Mocha, and this gives you an XML file that you can suck into your build pipeline to kind of give you a bit more information about the specifics of the build and the test that it ran. So Truffle, they are focusing not just on Ethereum. They are going to work with all the blockchains. So they showed a demo of an early alpha of Truffle 5 with the pet shop demo running on Sawtooth. What else we got? So Ganache 2.0, there's no timelines for these yet. They're still working on them, but they're planning on providing a lot more information on the specifics of your contracts and the specifics of events. So that will be good. And similarly, Drizzle 2.0, there's some nice things happening in there on the UI side, event analytics, and supporting more different JavaScript libraries more than just React. So this slide is all about some JSON RPC test methods. So these are methods that you wouldn't want to see these in a production blockchain client, but they're very useful when you're testing. So snapshot and revert, that is how Ganache provides basically a clean slate for every test file within Truffle. So within Truffle, you can write your test files in JavaScript or Soli, and each test file, if you just run Truffle test, it will run through all of your test files, and each test file gives you basically a clean environment, and that's how they do that with that snapshot and revert, those calls. And then EVM increase time is basically artificially moving time forward in your blockchain client. So you can sort of say to Ganache, this event happens, and then a day later I expect this to be the state. I'm pretty sure there's also EVM decrease time as well. So they kind of help you manage and test for those time-related things.
So Sally, if I'm got some Truffle test code, which is that JavaScript code, would I be able to just do that call, or how would I actually say do EVM, I don't know, snapshot? Or is it some, because you're saying Ganache command line interface, so I guess, is that like so you've got to coordinate your CLI with the test code, or how does it work?
I haven't actually played too much with poking the CLI with specific JSON RPC commands. I know that you can call EVM increase time from within your test methods.
Okay.
I'm not sure of the specifics, but I can look it up.
Yeah, because I know at the moment you can essentially get it to produce a block, or essentially increase time by adding a block.
Yeah, so EVM mine, which is the last method there on the slide, basically triggers the creation of that block regardless of the status of mining. So that might be the one that you're thinking of.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So you could call EVM increase time in the same way, and you specify a number of seconds to sort of jump forwards. Colony, there's a future slide on Colony, but they use EVM increase time a fair bit in their tests because they have time-related issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So events in testing. So basically the point here was it's not widely used to use events in testing to test for event-related things because doing it manually is a bit of a pain. But there are a couple of libraries, and there's links there to JavaScript libraries that enable you to test for specific things related to events. So I want this event to have occurred. I don't want this other event to have occurred. And using Oracleize, you can await specific events, and I think that's also to do with like I want this transaction to happen, and then I want to look at the transaction result, so you can kind of examine that with that library as well. Forking with Ganache. So this feature's been in there for quite a while, but I hadn't I wasn't aware of it before. So you can use Ganache CLI with the -- fork and point it at a specific blockchain. So mainnet, Ropsten, Rinkeby, or your local whatever you happen to be running, and you can optionally specify a block number. The default value is the latest block, and basically then Ganache will serve up the state of that blockchain at that block with the added bonus of it being served by Ganache, so it's fast and it doesn't download any of that before fork data from the actual blockchain. It just uses a fallback method to query it sort of, and then it's got it sort of cached in Ganache. So you can use that to test in production. You can run your honeypot smart contracts to see what will happen without actually running it in the real world. So you can sort of test in that state, but without any of the risks of losing all of your ether and so on.
Yes. Imagine if someone wanted to test an attack or something against, I mean, say, remember that person who ran some command or against the parity wallet and then it self-destructed. They could essentially use this to test it out and go, oh, hey, I found a bug, without actually wiping out the parity wallet, for instance, I guess. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay. Well, yeah, obviously less nefarious things like testing code and trying to work out upgrade scenarios or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
cool.
Because, by default, Ganache is serving you up a fake blockchain and it's always starting from scratch. So, that's useful for doing unit testing. But if you want to test in a more sort of complex environment with some existing state, then this is a way that you can do that.
Yeah, and so, it sounds really useful for upgrade, because you can imagine you could have some existing state, you're thinking you're going to upgrade from, version 2 to version 3, and you could use this to test it out to make sure it's going to work.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I can see that one being really useful. Yeah. So this is about Colony. So Colony, they are big users of smart contracts and Truffle. They had, I think, 390 Truffle tests that take like 2 hours to run. They've built their own Solidity code coverage tool. So how that works is they run their tests with code coverage turned on. So then those tests take about 50% longer to run, but then it gives them those reports on code coverage. And they were very proud to say that 90% code coverage. They also did a presentation on a pattern for upgrading contracts. So basically using a delegate pattern and kind of just replacing the bit in the middle and isolating the storage so that doesn't need to be upgraded at the same time. They use Circle CI. They run some of their tests against parity, but because they use that in EVM increased method, the parity doesn't implement that, so they can't run all of their tests against parity. And they also mentioned this Solium, which is basically a linter for helping you with code coverage in Solidity. So they've written some of their own rules, and some of those were specifically to do with how they do those contract upgrades and how they need to isolate the storage. So that was all very interesting. So this talk was unobvious hacks in Ethereum. So they sort of went through very specific examples of hacks that they've seen this year in Ethereum. So the first 3 bullet points there are, there was one to do with assembly. So you're basically, instead of returning the expected thing from your constructor, you're returning some assembly code, which was a bit nasty. And storage slots, if you don't line up your storage slots, and this was a similar thing to what Colony were talking about, of how they have to specifically structure their those storage slots in their different in their storage layer. If you don't line up things the right way, they kind of override each other in strange ways. And the negative number, if you take the negative of the maximum uint 256 value, you get the same value back, not the absolute value.
Isn't that a bug? That sounds like...
It's to do with because it's the maximum size integer, so there's no room for the...
Yeah, but surely it should throw some sort of, it's a bit like a divide by zero error. You're trying to get it to do something wrong. But for the storage slots, that sounds strange, because I thought the thing with storage slots was that you should try and have your things that are less than 256 bits together, so that then, you hopefully only use up one storage slot, which might save you some gas. But
if you don't fully understand how those slots kind of get slotted in, you're right about the space saving, but if you don't fully understand exactly how that works, you can get some quite unexpected results.
Okay. Sure. All right, cool.
Their suggestions basically to try and prevent these sorts of strange behaviours were study the best practices. They referenced a thing called underhanded solidity, which was basically a competition. They were getting people to write smart contracts that, look pretty legit, but actually they have some of these strange behaviours which aren't obvious at first. Absolutely avoid assembly testing, obviously, static and dynamic analysis, plan for upgradability, because you're probably going to find some bugs, at some point, sponsor bug bounties, and hire an auditor. So this EIP 1740 is a classification for smart contract weaknesses. And just a couple of examples there with integer overflow and assert violation. But if you go and have a look at that URL, you'll see there's a whole bunch of weaknesses that they've classified. So then things like Mithril can actually give you reports on your smart contract saying you've got these specific weaknesses. So they showed an alpha of their guardrails product, which basically is a plugin to GitHub, so that when you open PR with your smart contract code, it will run on that Solidity code and give you those specific reports and nicely inline in your GitHub PR and so on. They also talked about a VS Code extension for Mithril, which is a tool for analysing for those vulnerabilities. In some future version of Truffle, I'm not sure if it's version 5, they're going to add a Truffle analyze command. It must be version 5 because they're already talking about it. So, and that will be to analyse for these vulnerabilities locally, before you even commit them. So this talk was, he was just kind of making the point that often your blockchain, your DApp might be used by like real people, not internet wizards. So if you've, met all these people in real life that are going to be using your app, you probably don't need, the fully trustless protocol. So, just kind of think outside of the box and what do you actually need for your app within the context that it's running in. RSK, so they call themselves Smarter Bitcoin. They started as a fork of the EVM. They've implemented that as a side chain to Bitcoin, and they've made some improvements. They reckon they get 100 transactions per second on chain, and they're building another layer, which they say will get them 2,000 transactions per second on chain and 20,000 per second off chain, which are pretty impressive numbers. But they were very closed about what, they weren't giving any details about what these improvements that they've made to the EVM.
Yeah, I wonder what trade-offs they've made. Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
these sort of things don't come free.
No. Yeah, and obviously it's not open source, so we can't look at the code or anything. But I did get a free T-shirt.
Oh, well, all good then. Was the
So,
T-shirt 20,000 transactions a second?
Absolutely. So there's just a couple of slides here with some of the tools and links for those tools that different people mentioned that they were using. So IPFS, people use that to sort of stick their ABI code style in your Solidity code. Open Zeppelin, a few people mentioned that. So it's a library of smart contract sort of reusable bits and pieces to do with ERC20 tokens. And then Daploy and Dapper, I think there's a fair bit of overlap between Daploy and what Truffle does for you, and Dapper and what Drizzle does for you. But yeah, if you're interested, go have a look. Yeah, so those first two were those JavaScript libraries to do with events in testing. Capture the Ether, that's kind of a nice one if you're getting started with Solidity. The Solidity extension for VS Code, which is nice. The Solidity coverage tool, which is written by Colony. The ETH gas reporter. So that one, by default, Truffle gives you a report when you run your test. It gives you a report for each test method, how many, it gives you a report in time. So this many milliseconds for these methods, and also for your contract deployment. So ETH gas reporter, instead of reporting in time, it will report you the actual gas used for each of those operations. And then, yeah, Mithril. So that's vulnerability scanning for your smart contracts. And yeah, there's just some links there to GitHub and Twitter for Truffle, TruffleCon, and also for Pegasus Eng, that's where you'll find the Pantheon open source code when it goes live on October 30. And then, yeah.
I said, woohoo. Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, there's been a lot of work going to that. It's going to be fabulous.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, straight after DevCon, we're running a hackathon. If anyone just happens to be in Prague, that's where we'll be. Any questions, Peter?
I'm all questioned out. I've asked questions I've been trying not to interrupt, but ask just, yeah. I don't know, do I have, I know I'm actively developing some Solidity code right at the moment. And in fact, I use IntelliJ and not VS Code. Did anyone talk about IntelliJ at Truffle, or has no one heard of IntelliJ?
No one mentioned IntelliJ. It's very much an audience of DApp developers, not an audience of Java developers.
Yeah, but you can use IntelliJ to do, pretty much any language you can think of, and which is why I've got it, because I guess it's a bit like VS Code, designed for 1 million languages. And anyway, not to worry. Yeah.
VS Code seemed to be the tool of choice. That's what all the people doing the demo were using, VS Code.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll have to try it out again at some point. Yeah. All right. Well. Cool. So I don't think I've got any more questions, but it's great you've got this slide up. So that for those people on the video, the next 3 talks we've got are going to be at ThoughtWorks at, 127 Creek Street, 129 Creek Street, level 19. And then after that, December 12 and beyond, we'll be at WeWork at 310 Edward Street. And yeah, so next week, you're not going to be able to make it next week, are you, Sally?
I think so.
uh, it's going to be fabulous. We've got 3 sets of researchers. So we've got Ellie from University of Queensland, and she's talking about supply chain movements of containers and produce and stuff, and it's really interesting. We've got Sally Ann and Michelle talking about provenance of clothing supply chain. And we've got Felicity, who's going to give us a bit of an overview of law and beef ledger and what they're doing. So it's going to be really fabulous. I'm really pumped for that one. And then, then I'm talking about the future of blockchain, which should be hopefully good. And then we're going to learn about the standards, which is going to be good. And I think for that Pantheon Ethereum client, that's actually going to be Rob Dawson, we've decided to switch around who's going to do that. So anyway.
Yeah, I probably should have updated my slide, but.
It doesn't matter. I mean, when I'm putting together the slides for next week, for October 31st, I'll update it because it's a moving target, all this stuff. Yeah. Well, look, thank you very much, Sally. That's been fantastic. And I'm sure everyone who would be watching the recording has enjoyed hearing all that information as much as I have. And I'm now going to kill the recording. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. And